Welcome to Irving, Texas. On behalf of the Irving City Council and myself, we're so excited to have the Council for Inclusion in Financial Services, I write that down so I make sure I say it properly, in our city again. It's such a great opportunity for us to be with you and to further your mission. The city of Irving is very fortunate. I'll brag on ourselves a little bit to start with. We have 7 Fortune 500 companies. We have 5 Fortune 1000 companies. We have 150 of the Fortune companies represented within our city. While we have a population of 240,000, we have 250,000 jobs. We're one of the few cities in the Metroplex outside of Dallas that has that amount of jobs. And so we're always concerned with how do we make sure that we have the ability to bring people together to do the work that we need done within our community. And while I talk about those exciting big companies that represent us here in the city of Irving, we have over 8,000 businesses that have less than 50 employees within our community as well. And that's the backbone of what we call Irving, Texas. And it's important for those individuals as they start their businesses, as they look into how they begin their new entrepreneurship, how they develop new product, and how they work within the community, not only the community of Irving, but within the whole Metroplex of over 8 million people. And so it's important what you are talking about here today and how you can get more people involved. I also have the opportunity, I serve on the DART board, and most recently we are looking at construction of the Cotton Belt as well as the D2 alignment downtown. A little over $2.5 billion worth of projects that will be done in the next 36 to 48 months. I also have the privilege of serving on the DFW Airport Board, where we just announced Terminal F under construction, and we're looking at over $3 billion worth of opportunity in that arena. So you're seeing just within 2 entities within the Metroplex, close to $5-6 billion worth of development that needs to be done within the next 3 to 5 years. Even locally, as we see, we've had 3 of our best years. When you balance it out, we've had over $1 billion worth of construction every year for the last 3 years within the city of Irving as well. And then there's a whole issue that comes along when dealing with TxDOT and the roads within the Metroplex. We are fortunate, we'll announce at the end of this year, the bids will come in that we'll be spending another $420 million on the intersection at 183, 114 and Loop 12. Again, almost $1 billion worth of development. So the opportunity to bring the women and minority businesses together to see how they can work under an umbrella to make sure that they're included in all this development that's going on in our community is extremely important to us. And the ability for them to have a place to go or people to mentor them and how they financially can achieve those issues and how they can be supportive and how they can be successful. So again, on behalf of the Irving City Council and myself, we're very excited to have you here in our community today, and I know that you're going to be talking about many helpful things that will continue to improve the lives of many, many people in the Metroplex and around the country. Thank you so much for being here.
So before we get started, I also wanted to acknowledge, first of all, the great work of my team. And so if you have any questions or concerns, they're standing over there. Wave. They've done an exceptional job of putting all this together and making sure that you have a great experience. So thank you to all of you for the great work that you do. I appreciate you very much. And I also want to acknowledge one other person that we're so excited to be here, Mr. Keith Murray, and it's because of him all of this is possible. So if you don't mind standing for me, sir. Thank you so much. So before we begin, I wanted to remind everybody about the Council for Inclusion in Financial Services and what its purpose is. There's so much confusion about diversity and inclusion, and in most cases, people think of diversity and inclusion, they think of gender and race. But it's not about gender and race. It's about the inclusions of ideas, what you bring to the table based on a discussion. What you look like and on the outside does not represent the benefits that you bring from what you bring from thought. And so we want to make sure that we focus on what everybody brings to an opportunity. And So there's three areas that we really focus on that we believe are underserved for most Americans, which is wealth management. Most people are relying on things like GoFundMe for life events when we'll go all the way through college without taking one financial literacy class. That is not good. So now we find ourselves faced with student loan debt, inability to bury our loved ones in a crisis. So we need to understand all of the wealth management products and services that are available to us, and that starts not after graduation from college, long before. It starts when you're old enough to get your first credit card. So it's really, really important that people understand that how much you pay for credit is based on how you manage credit. So it doesn't start when you're trying to buy your first home. It starts long before that. So that's financial literacy. That's one thing. The second thing is when you're producing products and services to serve all Americans, then the people at the decisions table need to look like the people they're selling the products and services to. So you want a diverse mix, and you want a diverse mix of ideas so that you can put the best products and services in front of people. So that's the second thing, that makes sure that there's generational inclusion, that there's inclusion of people with disabilities, that there's inclusion of women. 51% of household decisions will be made by a woman or a minority. But if they're not included in the products and services that are available to them, there's a gap. And we need to close that gap. But it doesn't mean at the exclusion of white men, which is a mistake that so many people make. It means inclusion, and that's everybody. We need everybody at the table. So I want to make sure we emphasize that. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, that's what we're speaking about. And the last thing is the board seats. Those are the critical decisions on how the financial services industry will move forward in the future. So if we don't have good balance on the board seats, meaning women, minorities, generational inclusion, disabled people, everybody needs to participate in those decisions that are affecting our financial future. And lastly, multiculturalism doesn't exist until all people have access to the financial products and services that helps them sustain. We don't have multiculturalism as long as we have homelessness, as long as we have people who cannot sustain. We do not have a multicultural environment. And we need to own that. And we need to feel comfortable in having those conversations about that. And sometimes we think that our business model doesn't need that attention. And so what we like to do today, and I'm going to introduce to you someone who's going to help me have a conversation with you about the importance, the economic benefits of diversity and inclusion. So Mr. Lenny McNeill is the National Director for U.S. Bank, Marketing Director for U.S. Bank. He has many awards in the area of working with community reinvestment opportunities. He's also worked with a lot of the traditional trade associations and doing work in that area. He's held leadership roles with Chase, Bank of America, WAMU, and currently with U.S. Bank. He also worked with Caliber Homes. So he has a lot of experience working in this field. So I thought, and I've had some interesting conversations with him. So I'm excited to bring to the stage to talk a bit with me about some tactics that you can employ to ensure that you gain the economic benefits of inclusion. Lenny, would you come and join me, please? Hello.
Thank you for having me. Hey, everybody. I can say hey in Texas, right? Okay. All right. Just wanted to be sure.
So before we get started, I would really like for you to spend some time talking about the work that you do. It's one thing for me to stand up here and introduce you and talk about all the stuff, but hearing the passion from you directly, I think will benefit everyone. So I would love for you to share that.
Okay. Well, officially, I am a Senior Vice President, Managing Director with U.S. Bank. My responsibility primarily is on the mortgage side of the house. I say primarily because really it encompasses all of consumer lending. So what does that mean? So it means mortgage, it means auto finance, it means direct lending, it means correspondent. These are all the things in which I'm a big part of, and that has to do with making sure that our organization is doing the right thing in terms of serving our customers. all of our customers. So diversity and inclusion plays a very, very key role, not only from a staffing perspective, but making sure that we're paying close attention to those targeted markets where we need to do a better job. One thing that I do know for sure, that I do take a great deal of pride in, and probably sometimes to the extreme, I'm a strong believer that in order to make change, you have to be willing to be the catalyst of the change, which means you have to have a seat at the table. I learned a long time ago that there was a saying that says, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. Have you heard that before? So because of that, that never leaves me. So that, if nothing else, that inspires me. It gives me passion. It gives me drive to make sure that when I'm sitting at the table, those who may need a nudge, those who may need a slap on the back of the head, whatever, or a swift kick in the, you get my drift. The reality of it is that the way that you influence the change is you have to speak on the change. You have to be a voice for the voiceless. You have to make sure that, you know what, when there's something that is urgent, something that's important, you get it out. And so I take a great deal of pride in that. That's why, one of the reasons why I love my job. I've been in the industry now 37 years. I can't even believe where did it go? I'm only 21.
Before I was born.
But anyway, I guess those are the words that I'm most proud of in terms of my role, my responsibility. And of course, we'll probably get into it, but there are some things that I've been able to institute and put into place at U.S. Bank that I'm very proud of, and you'll hear more about that as time goes on.
Great. So let's chat a bit.
Sure.
When we were talking before, you mentioned something about some don'ts. So I thought that was great, the concept about some don'ts around diversity and inclusion. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the thing about don'ts is, I don't know. Like I said, I've been in 37 years in the industry, and I'm amazed at how I'm still surprised at some things that other competitors or people in the industry are doing or are not doing. And it's interesting. We'll start with the business case for an inclusive business strategy. Really? Is that even a question? I mean, and I'm amazed at how many people do not make that part of their business strategy. It's got to be at the forefront of whatever it is you're doing. I mean, I look in terms of my responsibility, how could I be effective if I didn't truly understand what the strategy is? And the strategy is basically laid out for me. When you have a situation where you've got 51% of the population being women, you've got 50% of the homeowners in the United States being part of the LGBTQ community, and 47% of the population are people of color. Now, do I really need to have a business strategy? I mean, my grandmother used to say something that's like, okay, if you act like a fool, you probably are a fool. That needs to be part of your business strategy. Inclusive. That is our audience. That's our population. That's where the growth is. It's not going to change. If anything, it's just going to progress. So the reality of it is I'm amazed at how many people don't have that as a part of their business strategy. One of the other don'ts that drives me crazy is, you can't just, write a script and think that everything is going to be okay in terms of inclusive. What I mean by that is this is an accountability. This is an all-hands-on-deck initiative. Everybody's got to drink the Kool-Aid. Some can't drink lemonade, some can't drink Kool-Aid. Everybody has to be on board. There's an accountability. And what I mean by that accountability is you got to put your money where your mouth is. So from a standpoint of supporting things financially, you've got to be willing to do that. You've got to invest, not only in your people, but in those initiatives that mean so much to so many in various communities. You just can't write something down on a piece of paper and expect that it's going to happen. In terms of goals, the goals need to match what the initiative you're trying to accomplish. One of the things that we did at U.S. Bank is we were obviously dealing with various issues about this, that, and the other. I remember using that platform to sit at the table with all of the folks on the origination side, and I said simply this: if you want it to change, you've got to make it part of the goal. Because the reality of it is it's like if they want to achieve it, if they want to make sure diversity is in place, if they want to make sure that we're doing things from a HMDA perspective, you've got to make sure it's part of the goal. It's an accountability. You can't just look at diversity and inclusion as an issue that needs to be overcome. The only way that you have success is you have to now turn the table and say, you know what? It's a blessing that needs to be embraced. That's when you're on your path to success.
And interestingly enough, some good examples of people not paying attention what not to do. Starbucks had to close its stores to do training, and today a lot of the ladies will be familiar with this store. Sephora, they sell perfume and makeup products. They're closed today because a star went into one of their stores and they called security on her and treated her different because she was a minority, and they had to shut their stores down today to take all their employees to the diversity training, because after this star complained on social media, more people started to complain that they were also having that experience when visiting their stores. So they're losing the economic impact of having to shut your business down for a day to deal with something that should have been a natural part of your business practice. It's astronomical. So not paying attention to it can be very costly, because in the end, the people in those communities are your customers. They're buying from you. So if they don't see themselves represented as part of your business model, you're going to lose access to those consumers. So that's the economic impact of it. So keep that in mind as you're looking around at your customer base, and how does your business resemble the community where it rests? I think that's really important in your website and your marketing material and your approach and how you deal with your customers. If you have a customer that is predominantly women, what's your strategy? How do you make them feel valued by your business model?
Economically, you're spot on. I mean, there's a big hit. But I think what even goes further and deeper than that is the reputational cost. That can't even be measured. Because now you're talking about, consumers alienating a particular business. Obviously, we know that, hey, the one marketing tool that's most reliable and probably faster than anything is word of mouth. And clearly, there are many consumers who will go out and say, hey, don't go there, don't do this, don't do. They're losing thousands of dollars each and every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then one of the other things is, I think, around don't put somebody in charge of your diversity and inclusion plan that has no experience or education in doing so. That is a risk you don't want to take on. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make sometimes, is putting people in charge of something that they know nothing about. It's one thing for me as a leader to say, I believe in diversity and inclusion, and I want to make sure my procurement process and my network supports that. But if that message doesn't transcend throughout the organization, when my supplier network person goes to Google search for a vendor, they're going to stop at the first page. So it needs to be intentional. Whatever process that you have in place to ensure that you can attract diverse employees, procurement opportunities, it is in your process. Your process needs to have a big enough net so that everyone has access to that information. Similarly, as many of you hold me accountable to make sure our supplier network has an outreach. You want to look at your own model to make sure you're doing the same thing when you're picking vendors in your community to support your efforts.
And another key don't for a moment think that everybody is on your team, okay? Don't fool yourself, especially if you are doing this work of diversity and inclusion. Not everybody is a fan of what you do and what you represent. And I only say that because I don't want you to get caught up believing that, this is a team effort. Anybody, and I hate to use sports analogies, but hey, it comes natural for me. So my point being is, if you have any type of team environment, the expectation is that, everybody makes a contribution to the team. And quite frankly, what happens in those scenarios where somebody is not doing their part? If they're not doing their part, the coach sits them down on the bench. Or sometimes, in worst case scenarios, they get removed from the team. But if you are one of the leaders of the cause, sometimes the coach will say, you know what, you get to make that call. You're the team captain. You get to make that decision as to whether or not somebody is with us or not. So that's a big don't that I think a lot of individuals have at companies, believing that everybody is on board. You still have to be cognizant of everything that's going on around you. And you also have to understand that a lot of people that you deal with are only thinking of themselves in the process. So it's up to you to be able to capture the good and the bad, get rid of the bad, and move forward with the good.
And then another area, so a lot of small business owners, and we have quite a few small business owners in the audience, so I think it's fair to address this, don't see that it applies to them. So I just wanted to share some statistical information with you guys around that. There's a Burson report that shows that diversity and inclusion across 128 organizations found that smaller companies with established cultures of diversity and inclusion had 13 times higher mean operational cash flow. That's very important. So that's an economic return that's tangible. McKinsey report stated that 25% of the racial and ethnic diversity in organizations are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry's medians. So it's the economic implications that you really want to pay attention to as well, because it's representative of how consumers will spend their money. And then another factor I think is really important is when you're looking for employees or people to engage with, millennials look for you to have a goal or a model around inclusion to make a decision as to whether or not they want to work for your organization. So those are some factors that impact the quality not only of the type of consumers that are willing to do business with you, but also who wants to work for you. Because those things together will help you have sustainability. So it's impactful regardless of the organization.
No doubt. And one of the things that I think we all need to pay attention to is, especially if you want to champion any cause related to diversity and inclusion, quite frankly, you have to be somewhat of a maverick. You have to be a take chances type of individual, to be heard. A lot of the organizations, I do think there's an attempt to do the right thing, but amazingly, and I could say this for a great number of companies, sometimes they don't know what the right thing is. And what I mean by that is the path to do right. And a lot of times that means somebody kind of taking control of the situation and having enough nerve to stand before a group of folks and say, you know what, we need to do better. Case in point, and I'll be the first to admit, one of the things that I was challenged with coming to US Bank is I just felt like, here's a great organization, but the reality of it is it's got to be the best kept secret in America. And what I mean by that is like so many people just didn't know about the organization. And so how do we change that dynamic? How do we become more exposed? And first and foremost, I clearly understood that there needed to be a connection to the communities, to the diverse communities. We needed to embrace them and get them on our side. First and foremost, I I'm willing to say I took a look at our landscape. And I think the first clue, and I love to tell this story, but I took a look at the landscape and I went to an event and they sent me some marketing tools, marketing materials. Now, I'll just say that this particular event was for one of the minority groups. So when the materials showed up, I'm all proud, here it is, and then lo and behold, all of my material didn't kind of match up to the area in which I was serving at the time. So I was like, oh my gosh, and I said, there must have been a mistake. They clearly sent me the wrong information. Well, when I called our marketing department, they said, oh, no, that's what we have. Oh, well, that's the first thing that's got to get fixed. So you have to be willing to take those things that you see as wrong, or those things that you see as have to change, and you have to go and be the champion to fix them. Now, along the way, like I said, you may get some pushback and you may get those types of things where people say, well, no, we can't spend it right now. That's okay, I'm patient. I can wait. But this is something that has to happen, And so going back to the don'ts, don't give up. Do not give up. You have to be persistent in your quest. You have to continue to fight forward. So you cannot be that type of person that quits. And I don't think any of you in this room would have had the success that you have today if you were that type of individual that quit, that gave up, that said, I've had enough. You're successful for a reason. And a great deal of that has to do with your willingness to fight and to persevere.
Absolutely. Excellent points.
I have a question for you now.
Okay.
Okay? So first and foremost, I have to applaud you for this event. I know this is your brainchild. So having said that, what were the 3 things that inspired you to have this event? Why was it important for you to have this platform, to obviously engage and entertain this group of individuals? Why did you feel that it was right here, right now, time to make this happen?
Well, I was sitting on a lot of boards for diversity and inclusion, and I found that I was sitting, it was almost like a minister going to church and the only one that ever showed up was the choir. And so I didn't feel that we were able to get our message beyond those that already understood what needed to be done. And I wanted to have impact on all. And I felt the messaging and some of the organizations got so focused on gender and race and not about inclusion of thought. For me, I don't really care what you look like. If you have a great idea, if you have a business solution that I can employ, I want that information. And I want the focus to shift to that. There are so many bright people in this world that can contribute to our business sustainability. If we limit ourselves to those that make us comfortable, we are losing opportunity at some really good information. So I wanted to be able to push that message forward, to encourage people to network outside of their comfort zone, because you'd be surprised at what you get from doing that. And that will also help you bring some good differentiators back to your business model, because you'll learn things from doing that, and then you'll apply that to your business model, and you'll be better for it. So I wanted to also help those that are underserved have access to those things that make a difference, because many of the small business owners and young professionals don't have access to some of the tools that help them increase their sustainability. And so I wanted to do that as well. And then the last thing was financial literacy. It bothers me so much with the amount of student loan debt, with the number of students that are coming out who want to buy a house, but they can't because they're buried in all this debt. And I teach a class on for women on financial literacy. And I start the class off and I always ask, how many of you have life insurance? And no one raises their hand. And then I said, well, who's supposed to bury you if you pass? You're passing that obligation on to somebody who probably really loves you, but now they have to miss you and be financially strapped to the obligation of your afterlife. So it's something as simple as that most people don't plan for afterlife. And that has a significant burden on whoever is left responsible for addressing those things. So having life insurance is very important, but most people don't look at that. They don't start worrying about that until it's too late. And I just regret sometimes that GoFundMe wasn't my idea.
Well, you know the funny thing about it is, man, I'm going to ask a question of you. How many of you feel as though you're in a work environment today where it's inclusive and you have a voice where you can be heard? By a show of hands, how many of you? Wow, that's not a lot. It's more hands down than. So how many of you, if you did work for a company where you had that, would utilize it? Okay, so a lot of you are not raising your hands. Is that because you're just shy, or?
I would like to hear from a few of you. Can we open up the floor to some questions or comments? I think we have a mic coming to somebody else.
Somebody had a hand up.
Any show of hands, anybody have a question or comment?
So one thing, while we're looking for someone, I wanted to tell you another quick story about, you have to be willing to hear from the masses, good or bad. That's how you get better. So, from a community standpoint, I will tell you that one of the things we implemented, and it's risky, but one of the things we implemented at US Bank is we implemented a community advisory committee. Now, now imagine me pitching this, right? Saying, hey, I got a great idea, Mr. President of US Bank. What if we just brought in community leaders on a quarterly basis to sort of give us a verbal report card? Dead silence. It's like, what are you thinking? Well, quite honestly, because you know what? First and foremost, you can't do better if you don't know better.
That's right.
Right? Our goal as an organization is to get better every day. And who better to tell us how we're doing than those people who are tied to the communities of which we serve? They're right there with our customer every single day. Okay, they are champions for our customers. So why wouldn't we open ourselves up, fly them in to our headquarters, put them, up for a day, give them a platform in which they can be heard. And oh, by the way, it gives us an opportunity to tell them what's going on with our company, some of our changes, some of our nuances. Why would that be a bad thing? I'm proud to say that it is in place, and it has been going on now for the last 2.5 years. And we do it twice a year. We do it once in the wintertime, because you know what? That's our way of getting back at them. We make them come to Minnesota in the middle of the winter. And then we do another one in the spring. Well, actually, it's summer, I guess you would call it. And I got to tell you, it's very, very productive. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is you have to be willing to expose yourself to ideas, to new ways of thinking, to new thoughts. And again, to Cheryl's point, that's diversity. That's inclusiveness. That's bringing a lot of different individuals into a room and giving them an opportunity to say what they like and what they don't like. The key is to not take it personal. It's not personal. It's a business opportunity. And we rely on our customer. So bringing these folks in twice a year is just an example of what a lot of companies could do if they're willing to really want to know the truth. And the amazing thing is we get everything from, you know what, I didn't like your last commercial, to real issues as it relates to, I would love to see more people of color in such and such a branch, or more people that speak a certain language in such and such a mortgage office. You get the spectrum, but the bottom line is you're getting it from the source. So, I mean, that's just an example of one of the things that, we have now done, and we're very excited about it. So, but anyway.
Do you track that change and share it with the staff?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, we track the information, we send out a report, not only to the various division leaders, but we also send that report back to the advocacy groups and the leaders of these organizations, and we thank them. Say, you know what, I mean, we bring them in, we buy them dinner, we do a nice thing, and they look forward to it, and after every meeting, we thank them from the bottom of our, thank you for that, even if they hit us hard. I mean, and it could happen, and we say, thank you. We should never assume that we know everything.
That's right.
And sometimes those folks can give us that information. So, did we ever get any hands up that wanted to address any questions or anything that we missed? Boy, this is a quiet group. They must know everything. So yes.
I love the idea of the diversity. How do you implement something like that where it just doesn't become a free-for-all for everybody's thought process?
She asked me about.
How do you integrate that where they make everybody happy?
So I want to make sure I understand your question. You're asking how do you have a diversity and inclusion program where you open up the conversation and you do it in a way that doesn't leave anybody feeling uncomfortable.
Correct.
So it's not a free-for-all, say whatever you want, but more organized, structured, let's share information in a way that we protect everybody involved in the conversation.
And implement that. I mean, implement their ideas where, you're moving forward with the inclusion and the diversity thought process, but it not just becoming a free-for-all.
Right.
Is there a guideline of some sort or other that you want to implement?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that question. That's why we encourage that you find somebody to lead a program that's experienced in doing that work. Because depending on your business model and what's unique to your business, you want to make sure that they understand what your specific business needs are, who your customers are, who your employees are, and how they're interacting with one another. So it's more to it's not a cookie cutter thing. There's some work that needs to be done. We need to do an assessment of where people see the organization is already, and then how to address it. Because if you ask 5 people from the same organization what they thought about the diversity and inclusion programs, or how they felt the diversity and inclusion was working with their organization, you get 5 very different answers in most cases if there's no process in place. So I think it comes with organizing the organization through somebody who's an expertise in that area. And I'll let Lenny and also add to that.
You took all I was going to say. Actually, I don't think I have anything really to add. I mean, it really boils down to the responsibility of, that individual, somebody who has a skill set that knows what to do with that information and can manage it and then implement whatever changes that need to take place. I mean, that's basically it.
You need to have, particularly a large organization, you should have somebody who is skilled and responsible for your diversity and inclusion process. And there needs to also be accountability for making sure that those intentional practices are used. Because diversity and inclusion it shouldn't just be a program. You want to get to the point where it is a natural norming part of your business model. Meaning, if you're recruiting and you're hiring, you're throwing out a big enough net to make sure you have access to a lot of diverse candidates. If you're doing procurement for suppliers, you want to make sure you're throwing out a big enough net so that you get a good diverse mix of potential respondents to your RFP or RFI or what have you. And similarly, when you're talking about your resources internally, that you create an environment by which ideas and information can be shared without people feeling uncomfortable to do that. So if you have somebody who's more vocal than someone else, you might need to say, I want to hear from Carolyn, excuse me, Joe, I want to hear from Carolyn right now. And let that person have a voice in the room. So it's those kind of things that generate inclusion. You know, I like to borrow off a quote from someone that says, you know, diversity, is inviting somebody to the dance. Inclusion is making sure that there's enough room for everybody to dance. So inviting me to sit at the table so you show on the surface that there's a female minority in the room, that's, okay, so you have a diverse mix. But inclusion is letting me speak and taking my thoughts and applying them to whatever discussion that is occurring. That's inclusion, and that's what you want to get to. So you want to make it so that every voice can come into a room. So when we talk about implementing programs that are related to diversity, you should focus more on, are we accepting and embracing those differences that people bring? So if it's a Black History Month, do we celebrate Black History Month at the organization? Do we allow them to bring in pictures and historical perspectives and educate us on things that happen within the Black community? Do we allow Latino employees to celebrate Cinco de Mayo if they choose to? So it's that type of thing. What are you allowing people to bring that's unique and different to them and share with their coworkers? That's really what it's about. And people are going to be uncomfortable, and it's okay to say I'm uncomfortable. But being able to say I am uncomfortable is a part of opening up the environment. If they feel safe enough to say, I'm uncomfortable with this, that means you're opening up the environment. That's a good thing.
I think it's okay too, beyond the uncomfortable, it's okay to say, I don't get it.
Yep.
I don't understand. You have to be able to say that. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar. I can tell you personally, I appreciate that so much more than anything else. I'm that guy. My 25-year-old daughter, she'll say something now, what? I don't get it. Dad, you don't understand? Nope. You want to run that by me again? I don't get it. And I think there's this perception, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion, that people, are supposed to know. That's not true. That's so far from the truth. And you know what? For me personally, I don't need you to know, but I hope you understand. Did you get what I said right there? I don't need you to know, but I do want you to understand. And if you understand, there's going to be a path in which we can exchange, right? And through that path of exchange, there comes education, there comes understanding on both sides. And if we can reach that happy medium, we can go somewhere, right? We can go somewhere. This is a funny little thing that happened, but I was at an event, and I was with one of my counterparts who happened to be white, right? We hang, we do this and that, but I brought him to an event that was predominantly African American. He leaned over to me and he said, Lenny, I don't think I've ever been in a room with all African Americans. And I kind of looked at him and I smiled and I said, welcome to my world. And he laughed, of course, and we both laughed. But see, there was that little banter there that it was like, see, those experiences become reality.
I get it now.
You know what I mean? They become reality. They become something you can then build upon. And, you know, he's still a very good friend of mine, and I take him everywhere. It's great. But there was an awareness moment there, you know? And those happen. And it's amazing how you can build on that type of stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming out and sharing.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And I'm looking forward to you participating with us again next year.
I'd love to. Well, one last thought I'll leave you guys with, and this is a quote that's very near and dear to me as you guys, pursue on your quest. And I know I'm going to mess up her name because, I do that. So her, Kapala Chawla, she was the first Indian American astronaut. And, she obviously went into space and did some wonderful things. Sadly, she passed away in an accident at NASA there. But just before that, they spoke to her and asked her, was this always a dream? What was your quest? What was your path? What's your passion? And she simply said very quickly, she said, the path to your dreams does exist if you have the vision to find it, the courage to get on it, and the perseverance to follow it. And that quote drives me every single day. And my interpretation of that is every single one of you in this room has a path to your own personal dreams. You absolutely do. But do you have the vision to find it? Do you know what you've got to do to maneuver your way through the minutia, the pushbacks, the challenges to find it? And then when you find it, are you willing to jump on? No matter what. And then do you have the guts, the willpower to follow through? Think about that. Thank you,
Thank
Cheryl.
you very much.
It's great.
We will be having some great things for you. Our next keynote is Ms. Molly Bloom, so we're excited about that. And also, I want you guys to remember, I want you to take away at least 3 things by the end of Wednesday that you can apply to your business and create a differentiator between you and your competitors. Can we commit to do that again this year? All right, thank you.